should I rent this lens or buy it? Oh! I guess I'm buying it. Hello filmmakers, Ash here, and welcome to Film It Yourself. When it comes time to actually shoot your film, you might find yourself asking the age-old question, do I rent my gear or do I buy it? So let's go over some pros and cons for both so you can decide which works best for you. Let's start off by going over the pros of buying gear. First, you'll always have access to that gear. So if it's something you use frequently, then buying it might be the right choice for that specific piece of gear. One thing I like to do is look up how much it might cost me to rent the piece of gear. Then I figure out how many times I'd have to rent the piece of gear before I'd pay the same cost as buying it. If I think I might actually rent the item the amount of times that would equal to the cost of buying it, then I usually decide to just buy it. Second, because you own the piece of gear and use it all the time, you become extremely comfortable with it and know all of the ins and outs of using it. Plus, you can customize the gear with settings and add-ons that might make it more functional for you. This can all be a huge time saver on set, as using the gear will feel like second nature. Third, since you own the gear, you can also turn a profit by letting other filmmakers rent your gear. This can also help balance out the cost of the item. In fact, the Duplass brothers used this very technique in their early filmmaking days to help pay off expensive camera purchases. They'd rent it out to their friends till eventually the rental fees paid for the camera. Okay, so those are the pros. Let's move on to the cons. First, buying gear can be very expensive, especially if we're talking about actual cinema lenses. Like, holy cow, I could put a down payment on a car with that. And they get even more expensive than this. I mean, look at this, $16,000? That's like my whole short film's budget. So, if you're planning on using expensive gear, buying might not be the best option. Definitely look into the cost and add it up to make sure you don't exceed your budget. And second, depending on where you live, it could be difficult and expensive to store a lot of big gear. I'm lucky that I live in a place with a garage, so larger items like C-stands, costumes, and props, I can keep there, while the more expensive or smaller items I keep in my house. But you might not have the space for C-stands or giant sriracha bottle costumes, so that could be a major con. So now that we've covered the pros and cons for buying, let's move on to the pros and cons of renting gear. First, it can be extremely cost-effective, especially if it's a piece of gear you won't use often, like a Steadicam or one of those expensive cinema lenses. Second, sometimes you can rent gear from your friends, which can be even more cost-effective, as they might give you a deal or even let you use it for free. By the way, thanks Lolita. However, I highly recommend you still have a rental agreement contract with them so that the rental terms are clear and everyone is on the same page. You can find basic gear rental agreements online at places like docracy.com. However, it's always a good idea to have a lawyer look over any contracts before using them. Third, renting cameras can not only be cost-effective, but also efficient, as usually new models of cameras come out every couple of years. This can keep you on the cutting edge of technology and save money. Okay, so now that you know the pros, let's go over the cons of renting gear. First, it's possible you've never used this piece of gear before, so there could be a learning curve when it comes time to use it. This could be a time suck on set if you're spending a lot of time trying to figure out settings. To avoid this, I actually recommend renting gear like this ahead of time so you can test it and make sure it works for you. Second, you only have the gear for a limited amount of time, so you have to make sure that you return it on time to avoid late fees. Speaking of fees, third, there can sometimes be hidden fees, such as shipping or insurance, so make sure you take those into account before renting. And pro tip, make sure you purchase insurance when renting gear because as the saying goes, you break it, you buy it. Oh, looks like I'm buying that too. And finally, fourth, sometimes used gear can be pretty beaten up. One time, I rented a lens that was used so much that it made a horrible noise when you racked the focus ring. This obviously was not great for video. If you can, I recommend you rent gear from a rental house so that when you come to pick it up, you can examine it and make sure it's in working order. However, if you don't have access to a rental house locally, then I recommend using Borrow Lenses. They have a large selection of filmmaking equipment and camera gear that you can rent and have shipped directly to your door. Check out the link in the description below to start renting your equipment like a true mail order filmmaking wizard. So, now that you know the pros and cons of renting and buying gear, you'll be able to better assess which one works best for you. Phew! Since I had insurance, I didn't have to pay for those broken rental items after all. I saved so much money, I was able to buy my own lens. Oh, rats.